Very good morning to you. Welcome along this Monday morning, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Yes, we are pretty happy about how the weekend went. We'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or of course you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. You can get us on Twitter at Off the Ball, or you can DM us on Instagram. However you want to get in touch this morning to luxuriate over Ireland's crushing victory over England, we've got time for you between now and 10 o'clock. Plenty of time. We're also going to talk football. We'll deal with the Manchester United situation, the Ireland injury crisis, and everything else that's going on after a fairly topsy-turvy and interesting weekend of football. But we've only one place to start, Owen Sheehan, and that is the annihilation, the assassination of the English rugby team at Lansdowne Road on Saturday. What a glorious, glorious afternoon.
Yeah, you must be pretty happy. I think my assessment of the Scotland game last week was described as morbid by people who were watching the show, and they were probably proven right in the end. There was just this sense of caution that came over me when Ireland beat Scotland the previous weekend, where if you beat Scotland by 3 points and have got an England team coming to town the following weekend who have hammered Ireland routinely over the previous 2 years, there was a natural sense of caution. And it is incredible, really, that was completely misplaced and Ireland won comfortably. It was just completely different to the prospect that England had posed over the last few years, and an unbelievable win, really like shades of the 2017 Six Nations when Ireland ruined the English Grand Slam on the final day. They didn't win the championship, but that win against England felt significant, and of course the following year they went on to do a Grand Slam themselves. It feels that now that you can't really argue against the fact that Andy Farrell has got this team in the right direction, and that's all anybody wanted from this Six Nations.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I don't want to do a Grand Slam next year. I think it's a bad idea for Irish rugby to do a Grand Slam a year out from World Cup. I think that, everybody, bite your hand up for that. No, let's not do that. Let's have some crushing heartbreak that sets us back to go back and reconsider everything that we've done in the last minute of, and let's see how that builds us up for the World Cup the following year. I don't want to overreact to this victory either. Like, if you think about the first 15 minutes, England played quite well. We ran the ball out of touch twice on either side. We were looking a little bit kind of pedestrian, and then Robbie Henshaw and Tyke Byrne start to get into the game. So rugby is such a weird sport that you can be playing quite well and lose matches. You can be refereed badly in key moments of games and the result goes against you, and all of a sudden your whole coaching ticket is terrible. Everything about the setup is wrong. We need to throw out the whole system. And we're all guilty of that, absolutely. But at the same time, on balance, I thought that Ireland had played okay, particularly with 14 men against Wales in the game against France. France are bloody good. And we were missing some key players in that match. And I still always felt like this is the very start of the Farrell era. He's a completely inexperienced head coach. He's had 18 months being in charge where he's not been able to wander around and spend 2 hours having conversations with people because of COVID, where they've been in the bubble and everything has been completely weird. It was always going to take a little bit of time. And he'd been naturally conservative, I think, in leaning on players who had worked in the previous regime. And over a period of time, we've seen more and more players come into the side who weren't starters. And it just felt like he was building. And also, I think the humility to go outside the setup and go, we need something else in the form of Paul O'Connell, which so clearly worked immediately. Yeah. That was, to me, the hallmark of a coach who was self-confident enough in what he was trying to do and brave enough to be trying new things, that he deserved some time. I don't think this is the finished article. I think that the best part about what happened on Saturday was that they still have loads of things that they can work on, and there's still, an excitement about what would happen if Caelan Doris is in that team. There's loads of other things. What will happen when Joey Carbery's in that team? Is Joey Carbery at 12 and Robbie Henshaw at 13, with the final 18 months of 2 years of Johnny Sexton now going to be like, wow, look at this, look what we can do? I don't know, but it's exciting.
Yeah, I think the one thing that the weekend does is it changes the Wales situation from the opening weekend from an excuse into an actual legitimate thing that happened, the 14-man thing, because I certainly was thinking that the narrative around that being like, oh, Ireland were down to 14 men and lost to Wales, and they came up narrowly against a good French team. I definitely had fractured those down to just complete excuses, to be honest. Whereas if you win your last 3 games, which Ireland did, all of a sudden you're like, hold on a minute. That red card actually did have a significant outcome on where Ireland finished in the Six Nations table in the end. The one thing that's really encouraging from an Irish perspective, I think, is the fact that you've got players like Sexton and Henshaw and Furlong and a few others who were there building towards that Grand Slam in 2018 and then experienced it all falling to pieces the following year and have now maybe experienced putting it back together. And I really think the tone after the game, when you listen to anybody speak, was a tone of relaxation, a tone of satisfaction, but not one of we're world beaters. I think that what has happened over the last few years won't be forgotten. And if there is success in the immediate future of this team, I'm talking about next year, which is a non-World Cup year, by the way, I think that will also be met with a calm state of mind. And I think that the learned experience of a harrowing 2 years is important as well.
I hope so, but the repetitive strain that we have within the history of Irish rugby in the World Cup cycles is mid-cycle boom, pre-cycle, pre-end of cycle, actual point of moment bust. And like you say, that hopefully these players will remember that, but it seems like there's been a collective amnesia every 3.5 years. Like, yeah, we're gonna do really well in this World Cup. It's going to be great, and then it doesn't happen. The bust happens. But look, let's luxuriate in some stuff. I mean, it's hard to pick a player of the tournament when Tadhg Beirne was basically man of the match in every game, and then Robbie Henshaw, you're like, actually, he could have been man of the match in all of the games from an Irish perspective in the games that we played. He played so well. But then Johnny Sexton's rebirth. Like, Sexton's accuracy in kicking, he missed one kick across the entire tournament. When you think about the fact that he had to go off, if he'd still been on the field in the game against Wales, what would have happened? Like, anyway, we're thinking positively. I thought that Sexton's game was sensational as well. I mean, obviously, people are saying he's not as good as he was when he was World Player of the Year, but like, there's a value to the experience that he brings that trumps some of the absence of athleticism. I mean, I don't even notice that there's a significant diminution in the athleticism that we see from Sexton in that game at the weekend. Like, that's as well as I've seen him play.
I think you noticed it from the first couple of minutes of the Scotland game as well, where you were like, God, this guy's putting his body on the line here. Defensively, he was brilliant, and I guess with the ball in hand as well, taking the ball to the line, to a fairly ferocious English line then at the weekend, was also noticeable. He finished this tournament so well, and there's no one else you want standing over an important kick for Ireland at this point. If he can keep his body in a good place and he plays that well every single week from here until whenever it is that his career ends, there's going to be no more talk about dropping him. It'll just be a patient waiting for whenever Sexton decides the time is up, because he has really taken back the narrative after the last 2 weeks. It would be ridiculous to suggest that if there was a World Cup tomorrow that he wouldn't be the starting 10 by a distance. He was brilliant the last 2 weeks. If you go throughout the entire tournament, of course, the two you mentioned there, Beirne and Henshaw, absolutely brilliant, and Hugo Keenan as well as the other person I throw into that trio. And then, like Sexton, Keith Earls is a man who finished the tournament in really good form, just stepping forward and not written off. Like, Keith Earls wasn't written off. It was just, I guess, Ireland were keeping their options open when it came to their wing places at the start of the tournament. We were getting excited about Larmour and Lowe. Stockdale could be coming back to injury. But in actual fact, Keith Earls is winger number one. He is the most trusted. He is still an unbelievably exciting player to watch. He has that pace that is right up there with any other Irish winger at the moment. And if you wanted to pick players in the Ireland team that you could be delighted for when they do something good, he's probably right up there as well. And that try off a set piece, which comes from the Paul O'Connell implementation, I'm sure, with Jack Conan peeling off the back, was a brilliant moment. And like, that goes down as, for me, the moment of the tournament from an Irish perspective. That set piece, the Conan, the haunting nature of actually being able to see that in that Easterby interview then early in the week, all just kind of fitted into this moment that kind of will go down as something that won't be forgotten too quickly. We're
rounding out into a position where we've got nice depth as well. If you had a second row of Beirne and Baird, you'd be like, well, that's a pretty good second row, because at that point your back row is going to be something that looks pretty good as well. If you've got to put Tadhg Beirne in your back row, you're like, well, I've got Tadhg Beirne in my back row, life is pretty good. And we played the whole tournament without Caelan Doris, who we think is potentially one of the most transcendent talents that Irish rugby has produced in a long period of time. So you've got to feel very positive about it. Again, I think the other thing is that we should also, there should be a minor mourning for the missed opportunity that there was a championship there for this group, and there was a proper full trophy for the tournament there for them, if things had gone slightly differently. There was a Grand Slam there. They were within a score in the other two games that they lost. And maybe it would have been too much too soon for this group, and maybe that everybody would have got too carried away. We should talk about the Welsh. Like, you know, obviously I got hammered. We got hammered. You managed to somehow scuttle away from what we were saying pre-tournament about how Ireland should go over there and do them, because we would always regret the fact that we didn't, that we suddenly would allow them to be reborn. And look what happened. I thought Wales were phenomenal over the course of the tournament as they grew into it. I thought they were amazing at the weekend. And I was also delighted that France beat them, because I don't think they would have deserved to win the Grand Slam over the course of the tournament. But Jesus, what a finish.
Yeah, the Super Saturday in the Six Nations is just now unmissable television at this point. And like I still just can't get over the fact that Wales blew a Grand Slam with the clock in the red. I just don't think this could be said enough. Like, it just had to be hammered home for me on television about 15 minutes after the full-time whistle. And I think it was just eventually said on Virgin TV, where it was like, lads, Wales lost a Grand Slam in the 82nd, was it 83rd minute? Like, it is just one of those extraordinary moments that like Welsh people must be waking up feeling absolutely horrible about. And they did everything under the sun possible to try and stop this French onslaught. This French team is bloody good, though, and that is the problem. That is the issue that the Welsh encountered on Saturday night. More than anything, they did everything they could possibly do, and France just, it turns out, are exceptionally good at attacking rugby. And once you're down to 13 men against even 14 Frenchmen, you're going to be in a whole pile of trouble. And just what an absolute cracker of a game. Like, you probably would have said, come the end of it, Wales did deserve the Grand Slam. Which is the irony here, that at the start we would have said not a hope, and the more games they won, the more reluctant we were to actually give them that credit. And then come Saturday night, they were so good against France that you're like, well, this sort of performance really caps off a Grand Slam. If you can be this dominant against France, then you deserve to win everything in the Six Nations. And then the last 20 minutes of the game were just mental, a game of their own. And I don't know how these crazy things happen in these vacuous stadiums with no fans watching on, because sometimes that energy can be the momentum shifter. It's unexplainable.
Yeah, we'll get into it in just a moment with Alan Quillan. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Here's what's coming up between now and 10 a.m. this morning on OTB AM. Alan Quillan, as I said, standing by. We're bringing the sports pages at 10 past 8. David Myler is going to join us at 20 past 8. We'll hear from Brian Kerr, who was on commentary duty for us at the weekend at 8:50. After that, talking Irish football, get the performance rankings at 10 past 9, a Six Nations special, and our paper review from yesterday at 9:30 is coming your way. It is 7:43 this morning. We're going to get Alan Quillan's thoughts in just a moment. We haven't talked about England and their chronic failure just yet, Owen, and how it's always difficult for us to watch a neighbour in distress like that.
Yeah, obviously before the 2019 Six Nations, I may or may not have said, get ready to get superior. Before that England game, which they obviously smashed Ireland in. What I meant to say is get ready to be superior around midway through the 2021 Six Nations. People just obviously picked me up wrong at the time. So I guess it was no surprise to us to see England get beaten. Like, the thing with England is that you talk about the boom-bust cycle that exists in Irish rugby. The opposite thing happens with English rugby. Like, I would not be surprised whatsoever that come the next World Cup, we're like, remember we beat England there and we were all celebrating in 2021? Well, come 2023, they got their house in order, and whether or not that's going to be with Eddie Jones is an entirely different question. That's probably where the real conversation in the Six Nations now lies, is who's going to be England coach this time next year.
I think it's going to be Eddie Jones. I think they're not going to sack him. The papers this morning are full of details on a clause that the RFU have a review, and so therefore they can sack him midway through this campaign if they want to, midway through this World Cup campaign. They don't have to stick with him, which is obviously good negotiating from whoever put the clause in, and maybe, all Irish sports bodies could come up with those in the future. But I think that actually the right thing to do is to stick with him. I don't know. Like, they did really well in the last World Cup, and you can see that team turning things around. If the Saracens players were all playing in the Premiership and were match fit, like, they definitely got better as the tournament went on. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think we were speaking to Ugo Mani on the show last week, and he did not agree that Ireland against England at the weekend was going to be like D-Day for either of these coaches, that Eddie Jones might be under a little bit of pressure, but it was never going to be decisive for whether or not he stays. I do think that that's a different conversation when once you actually see in the cold light of day that Ireland were actually dominant against England. And it still does, and I know we're going to be speaking to Quinny in just a moment, it still does beg our belief that Ireland managed to turn around what were hammerings against England into a dominant win. It just seems impossible that this group of Ireland players would get into a position where they could beat England again recently, and they did so comfortably.
We have a Gillette starter pack up for grabs on the performance rankings this morning. If you want to get involved in that, then tell us who you think should be in it. We need a red, amber and green from you. You can text us on 0879 180 180, or of course you can leave a comment